Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Connor Reed stood in the doorway of his modest two-bedroom apartment, watching his 17-year-old daughter, Emma, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table. Empty energy drink cans formed a small fortress around her, and highlighter marks covered every surface of her advanced placement textbooks. The girl had been pushing herself for 3 years straight, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working weekends at the local library to build her resume. "Dad, I got it," Emma whispered, her voice barely containing her excitement. The Morrison Foundation Scholarship. Full ride to Stanford. Connor felt his chest swell with pride. After the divorce 2 years ago, he lost the house, most of his savings, and had to start over as a freelance security consultant. But Emma had been his anchor, his reason to keep fighting. She'd watched him rebuild from nothing, and it had only made her more determined to succeed. "How much?" he asked, though he already knew the Morrison Foundation was prestigious. For years, everything covered. Tuition, room, board, books. $240,000. Emma's hands shook as she held up the acceptance letter. "I actually did it." Connor pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. The Morrison Foundation only awarded 5 scholarships annually to students nationwide. Emma had competed against thousands of applicants, and her combination of academic excellence, community service, and a heartbreaking essay about overcoming family hardship had put her over the top. His phone buzzed. Lisa, his ex-wife. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Connor, we need to talk about Emma's scholarship situation." Lisa's voice carried that familiar condescending tone that had poisoned their marriage. "What situation?" "She earned it. Trevor and I have been discussing this, and we think it would be better if the scholarship went to someone who really needs it. Emma can get student loans like everyone else." Connor felt ice form in his veins. Trevor Walsh was Lisa's new husband, a real estate developer who'd swooped in during their divorce proceedings. The man had money, connections, and apparently, the ability to convince Lisa that their daughter didn't deserve what she'd earned. "Lisa, Emma worked for this. She sacrificed everything. We deserve it more than her," Lisa interrupted. "Trevor's nephew is applying to Stanford next year, and his family has been through some real struggles. Not like Emma, who's had everything handed to her." Everything handed to her? Connor looked at Emma, who was pretending not to listen while organizing her scholarship paperwork. The girl had worked night shifts at the library, tutored younger students for extra money, and hadn't bought new clothes in over a year so she could afford application fees. "You can't just take her scholarship, Lisa." "Actually, we can. Trevor has connections on the Morrison Foundation board. He's already spoken to them about redirecting the award." "It's done, Connor." The line went dead. Emma was looking at him now, her face pale. "Dad? What did Mom mean?" Connor didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Trevor Walsh, remembering the man's smug expression during the divorce proceedings when he'd sat behind Lisa like some kind of protector. Trevor had made subtle comments about Connor's failure as a provider, suggesting that Emma would be better off in a more stable environment. "Pack a bag," Connor told Emma. "We're going to see your mother." The drive to Lisa's new house took 45 minutes. She'd moved to Westfield Heights, an exclusive development where Trevor owned several properties. The house was a sprawling colonial that probably cost more than Connor would make in 5 years. Trevor answered the door. He was tall, soft around the middle, with the kind of artificial confidence that came from inherited wealth. "Connor, this is unexpected. We need to discuss Emma's scholarship." "Actually, we don't." Trevor stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "The decision's been made. The Morrison Foundation agrees that the scholarship should go to a more deserving candidate. More deserving than a girl who worked 3 years straight for a perfect GPA." Trevor's smile was patronizing. "Connor, you wouldn't understand. This is about legacy, about families who've contributed to their communities for generations. The Walsh family has a long history with Stanford. Emma, well, she comes from a broken home. That was when Connor's military training kicked in. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger before transitioning to civilian life. He knew how to read people, how to identify weaknesses, and most importantly, how to plan operations with precision. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at Trevor for a long moment, memorizing every detail of the man's face, then turned and walked back to his car. Dad, Emma was crying now. Is it really gone? No, sweetheart. It's not gone, but we're going to have to fight for it. As they drove home, Connor was already formulating a plan. Trevor Walsh had made a critical error in judgment. He'd assumed Connor was just another defeated ex-husband who would roll over and accept injustice. But Connor wasn't just any ex-husband. He was a man who'd survived combat, who'd learned that in war, the victor wasn't always the strongest or the wealthiest. Sometimes, it was simply the one willing to go further than their enemy ever imagined possible. And Trevor Walsh had just declared war on Connor's daughter. Chapter 2. Reconnaissance and Preparation. The next morning, Connor began what he called intelligence gathering. He'd learned in the military that successful operations required understanding your enemy completely, their routines, weaknesses, connections, and most importantly, what they valued most. He started with public records. Trevor Walsh owned Walsh Development Group, a company that specialized in luxury residential projects. The business had been started by Trevor's father in the 1980s and was now worth approximately $30 million. Trevor lived off the company's profits while maintaining the image of a successful developer, though Connor's digging revealed that Trevor's actual contribution to the company was minimal. More interesting was Trevor's personal life. The man was obsessed with his reputation in Westfield Heights. He served on the country club board, hosted charity events, and had his picture in the local society pages almost weekly. His ego was massive, and his sense of superiority seemed to be built entirely on his family's money and social connections. Lisa had always been attracted to status and comfort. During their marriage, she'd constantly complained about Connor's military salary and their modest lifestyle. When Connor left the Army to start his security consulting business, Lisa had grown increasingly resentful of their financial struggles. The divorce had been swift and brutal, with Lisa claiming she deserved more than half of their assets because she'd sacrificed her career to support Connor's military service. Now she was living in Trevor's world, playing the role of the perfect socialite wife. Connor had seen her Instagram posts, charity luncheons, country club events, expensive vacations. She'd reinvented herself completely. But Connor also knew Lisa better than anyone. Beneath her new polished exterior, she was still insecure and paranoid. She craved validation and lived in constant fear of losing her newfound status. That insecurity would be useful. Emma was struggling. She'd thrown herself even deeper into her schoolwork, as if perfect grades could somehow restore her stolen scholarship. Connor watched her pushing herself to exhaustion and felt his resolve harden. "Dad, I got a call from Stanford today," Emma said one evening. "They said there was some kind of administrative issue with my scholarship. They wouldn't give me details, but they suggested I explore other funding options." Connor clenched his jaw. Trevor's connections were indeed powerful. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd figure something out." "But Dad, I can't afford Stanford without that scholarship. Even with loans, it's too much." "You're going to Stanford, Emma. I promise you that." That night, Connor made a call to his brother Mike, who still served in Army intelligence. "I need a favor. Personal or professional?" "Personal, but might require some creative interpretation of regulations." Mike was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" "Background checks on Trevor Walsh and his associates. Financial records, personal habits, anything that might be useful. And I need to know about his connections to the Morrison Foundation." "Connor, you're talking about civilian surveillance. That's not something I can just." "Mike, they stole my daughter's scholarship. A scholarship she earned through 3 years of perfect grades and sacrifice. They're destroying her future because they think they're entitled to it." Another pause. "Send me what you have. I'll see what I can do." 3 days later, Mike delivered. Trevor Walsh was exactly what Connor had suspected. A privileged man-child who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. But there were some interesting details. Trevor had a gambling problem. He'd been making regular trips to Atlantic City, sometimes losing tens of thousands in a single weekend. He'd also been having an affair with his secretary for over 6 months, meeting her at a downtown hotel every Tuesday afternoon. More importantly, Trevor's connection to the Morrison Foundation came through his uncle, Richard Walsh, who served on the board. Richard was the one who'd pushed through the scholarship transfer to Trevor's nephew, a kid named Kyle Walsh who had mediocre grades and no real accomplishments. But the most valuable information was about Trevor's business. Walsh Development Group was leveraged heavily for a new project called Riverside Commons, a luxury apartment complex that was months behind schedule and significantly over budget. Trevor had personally guaranteed several loans, putting both the company and his personal assets at risk. Connor smiled as he reviewed the intelligence. Trevor Walsh thought he was untouchable because of his money and connections. But money and connections couldn't protect him from a man who understood warfare. The plan began to take shape. It would be complex, requiring precise timing and multiple moving parts. But when Connor was finished, Trevor Walsh would understand that some people couldn't be bullied and some fights shouldn't be started. He made another call, this time to Danny Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger who now worked as a private investigator in the city. "Danny, I need to hire you for a surveillance job." "What kind of surveillance?" "The kind that maps out someone's entire life. Every routine, every habit, every person they interact with. I need to know when they breathe." "How long do you need?" 2 weeks. "And Danny, this is personal." Danny's voice turned serious. "Someone hurt your family?" "They hurt Emma. Then they hurt all of us. I'll start tomorrow." As Connor hung up, he felt the familiar calm that had always preceded combat operations. The reconnaissance phase was complete. Now it was time to begin the assault. Chapter 3, The First Strike. 2 weeks of surveillance had given Connor a complete picture of Trevor's life. The man was incredibly predictable. Morning jog at 6 a.m., office by 8:30, lunch at the country club, affair with his secretary on Tuesdays, home by 7 p.m. Trevor lived his life like a man who'd never considered that someone might be watching. Connor's plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 would establish psychological pressure and make Trevor understand that his actions had consequences. Phase 2 would escalate the pressure while gathering more ammunition. Phase 3 would be the final assault that would destroy everything Trevor valued. Emma was still fighting for her scholarship through official channels, writing letters to Stanford and the Morrison Foundation. Connor encouraged her efforts while knowing they would be futile. Trevor's uncle had too much influence, and the decision had already been made in backroom conversations. But Connor had learned something important from his surveillance. Trevor's nephew Kyle, the boy who was receiving Emma's scholarship, was a senior at Westfield Prep Academy. More importantly, Kyle was heavily involved in social media and had a very public presence. Connor created several anonymous accounts and began documenting Kyle's online activities. The boy was everything Connor had expected, entitled, wasteful, and completely unaware of how privileged his life was. Kyle posted videos of himself destroying expensive items for fun, made racist and sexist comments, and bragged about getting into Stanford despite his mediocre grades. "Daddy's connections are amazing," Kyle had posted just 2 days earlier. "Got a full ride to Stanford, and I didn't even want to go there. Might drop out after freshman year and travel Europe instead." Connor screenshot everything. Then he began phase 1. The first strike was psychological warfare. Connor knew that Trevor's greatest weakness was his obsession with his reputation and image. So Connor decided to attack that image systematically. He started small. Anonymous tips to the IRS about Walsh Development Group's tax filings. A call to the building inspector's office expressing concerns about safety violations at the Riverside Commons construction site. An anonymous letter to the country club board suggesting they investigate Trevor's gambling debts. Each action was carefully crafted to create paranoia without revealing Connor's involvement. Trevor would know he was under attack, but wouldn't know who was attacking him or why. The gambling revelation came first. Connor had Danny photograph Trevor at the Atlantic City Casino, capturing images of him losing badly at the poker tables. These photos were anonymously mailed to Lisa with a note. "Thought you should know how your husband spends your money." Lisa's reaction was immediate and violent. Connor could hear her screaming at Trevor from across the street when he drove past their house that evening. The fight lasted for hours, with Lisa threatening to leave if Trevor didn't stop gambling immediately. Next came the construction site inspection. The building inspector found multiple code violations at Riverside Commons, resulting in a stop work order that would cost Trevor hundreds of thousands in delays. The local newspaper covered the story, highlighting safety concerns and questioning Trevor's competence as a developer. But the most devastating blow came when Connor leaked Kyle's social media post to a Stanford student newspaper reporter. The story ran with the headline, "Morrison Foundation Scholarship Recipient Calls Award Daddy's Connections, Jokes About Dropping Out." The backlash was swift and brutal. The Morrison Foundation received hundreds of angry calls and emails. Stanford's admissions office launched an investigation. Most importantly, the story went viral on social media, with thousands of people expressing outrage about the scholarship system being rigged for wealthy families. Connor watched Trevor's world begin to crumble from his car, parked across from the Walsh development offices. Trevor was on the phone constantly, trying to manage the various crises. Lisa had moved back to her sister's house temporarily, taking their young son with her. The country club had quietly asked Trevor to step down from the board, pending the resolution of his gambling issues. 3 days later, the police were at their door, but not for the reasons Trevor expected. Connor had used his contacts to arrange for a thorough audit of Walsh Development Group's building permits and tax filings. The investigation revealed that Trevor had been cutting corners on safety requirements and had made several questionable deductions on his business taxes. The charges weren't serious enough for prison time, but they were public enough to destroy Trevor's reputation completely. The local news covered his arrest, and the story spread throughout Westfield Heights society. Emma watched the news coverage with confused satisfaction. "Dad, is this connected to my scholarship somehow?" Connor put his arm around his daughter. "Sometimes, sweetheart, justice finds a way." But Emma's scholarship was still gone, and Connor's plan was far from complete. Phase 1 had been about establishing dominance and making Trevor understand that he was vulnerable. Phase 2 would be about applying sustained pressure until Trevor broke completely. And Phase 3 would be about teaching Trevor Walsh that some people couldn't be bullied, and some fights came with a price higher than he'd ever imagined. Connor looked at his daughter, studying for her AP exams despite everything that had happened. Emma deserved better than the world Trevor Walsh represented. She deserved a future built on merit and hard work, not connections and corruption. Trevor Walsh had started this war when he decided to steal from a teenage girl, but Connor was going to finish it. Chapter 4: Pressure and Leverage. The arrest had been just the beginning. Connor watched from his surveillance position as Trevor's life began unraveling in ways the man had never imagined possible. The gambling story had spread throughout their social circle. The construction violations had cost him nearly $500,000 in delays and fines, and the scholarship scandal had made the Walsh family name toxic in academic circles. But Connor wasn't satisfied with public humiliation. He wanted complete destruction. Phase 2 began with Trevor's affair. Connor had Danny document every Tuesday meeting with the secretary, a woman named Jennifer Croft who was 23 and apparently unaware that Trevor was married. The affair had been going on for months, with Trevor spending company money on expensive hotels and gifts. Connor compiled the evidence carefully: photos, hotel receipts, text messages that Danny had intercepted using surveillance equipment. But instead of sending them to Lisa immediately, Connor decided to use them as leverage. He arranged a meeting with Trevor through an intermediary, a lawyer who claimed to represent an anonymous client with information about Walsh Development Group. Trevor, desperate to control the various scandals erupting around him, agreed to meet at a downtown coffee shop. Connor arrived 30 minutes early and chose a corner table where he could observe Trevor's entrance. When a man walked in, Connor was satisfied to see the toll the past weeks had taken. Trevor looked exhausted, paranoid, constantly checking his phone as if expecting more bad news. "Mr. Walsh," Connor said, standing as Trevor approached the table. Trevor froze when he recognized Connor. "You, what the hell are you doing here?" "Sit down, Trevor. We need to talk." "I'm not talking to you about anything. Whatever games you're playing." "Your affair with Jennifer Croft." Connor placed a single photograph on the table. It showed Trevor and the secretary entering the downtown Marriott. Tuesdays at 2 p.m., room 1247. She thinks you're divorced. Trevor's face went pale. He sat down heavily, staring at the photograph. What do you want? My daughter's scholarship. Return to her immediately. I can't do that. The Morrison Foundation has already. Connor placed another photograph on the table. This one showed Trevor at the Atlantic City Casino, clearly intoxicated and losing heavily at a poker table. Your gambling debts total $340,000. That's more than your company's liquid assets. Who are you working with? Nobody you need to worry about. I'm working alone, Trevor, and I'm very good at what I do. Connor leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your Uncle Richard and tell him that new information has come to light about Kyle's qualifications. You're going to recommend that the scholarship be returned to its original recipient, my daughter. I can't do that. Kyle's already been accepted. Kyle posted on social media that he might drop out after freshman year to travel Europe. The Morrison Foundation takes that very seriously when they're investing $250,000 in a student. Trevor was sweating now. Even if I wanted to, Richard won't listen to me. He thinks I'm a liability after all the recent publicity. Connor smiled coldly. Then you'll have to be very persuasive. Because if Emma doesn't have her scholarship restored within 72 hours, I start releasing everything I have on you. The affair photos go to Lisa, the gambling records go to your business partners, and the tax irregularities go to federal investigators. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you an opportunity to do the right thing. Something you should have considered before you decided to steal from a 17-year-old girl. Trevor stared at the photographs for a long moment. And if I do what you want, if I get the scholarship restored, then you and I are done. I disappear from your life, and you never hear from me again. How do I know you won't use this information anyway? Connor gathered the photographs and stood up. Because unlike you, Trevor, I keep my word. Fix this, and it all goes away. Don't fix it, and I'll make sure you lose everything you've ever cared about. Trevor called him that evening. I spoke to Richard. He's willing to reconsider the scholarship decision, but he needs documentation showing that Kyle isn't a suitable candidate. I'll have that to you within the hour. Connor had already prepared a comprehensive file documenting Kyle's social media posts, academic record, and public statements about not taking the scholarship seriously. The evidence was damning and would give Richard Walsh the cover he needed to reverse the decision without admitting corruption. But Connor had also prepared something else, a complete dossier on Richard Walsh himself. The man had his own secrets, including a series of questionable business dealings and a tendency to use his foundation position for personal benefit. Connor didn't plan to use this information unless absolutely necessary, but he believed in having backup plans. Emma was working at the library when Connor got the call from Stanford. The Morrison Foundation had contacted them about administrative errors in the scholarship allocation. Emma's award was being restored immediately, and she would receive an official apology for the confusion. Connor drove to the library and found Emma shelving books in the young adult section. When he told her the news, she dropped the books she was holding and started crying. Dad, how did this happen? Did you do something? Connor pulled his daughter into a hug. I just made sure the right people knew what kind of person Kyle Walsh really is. Sometimes the truth is enough. But even as Emma celebrated, Connor wasn't finished with Trevor Walsh. The man had showed him exactly what kind of person he was, someone who would steal from a child to benefit his family. Trevor needed to understand that actions had consequences and that some people couldn't be bullied without expecting retaliation. Emma had her scholarship back, but Connor's plan had always been about more than just the scholarship. It was about teaching Trevor Walsh a lesson he would never forget. Phase 3 was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. With Emma's scholarship restored, Connor could have walked away. His daughter's future was secure, and Trevor had been humiliated enough that he would think twice before bullying anyone else. But Connor wasn't the type of man who left jobs unfinished. Trevor Walsh had revealed himself to be the worst kind of predator, someone who used wealth and connections to take opportunities from deserving people. The scholarship theft hadn't been desperation or necessity. It had been pure entitlement. Trevor believed he had the right to take whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Connor decided to teach him otherwise. The trap had been months in the making. While publicly pressuring Trevor about the scholarship, Connor had been quietly working on a much larger plan. He'd used his intelligence contacts to discover that Trevor's uncle Richard had been using his position on the Morrison Foundation board to funnel money to projects that benefited the Walsh family business. The scheme was subtle but effective. Richard would recommend foundation grants to community development projects that were actually Walsh development properties. The foundation would provide low-interest loans or outright grants, allowing Trevor to develop luxury properties at a fraction of the normal cost. Connor had traced at least 4 separate instances where foundation money had been diverted to Walsh projects over the past 5 years. The total amount was nearly $2 million, money that should have been used for scholarships and community programs. More importantly, Connor had discovered that Trevor was actively expanding this scheme. The Riverside Commons project that was currently plagued with construction delays was being partially funded by a foundation grant that Richard had pushed through just 3 months earlier. But Connor's real masterstroke involved Jennifer Croft, Trevor's secretary and mistress. Through careful investigation, Connor had learned that Jennifer wasn't just an innocent young woman being manipulated by her older boss. She was an accountant who had been helping Trevor hide the foundation money in his company's books. Jennifer had created a complex system of shell companies and false invoices that made the foundation grants appear legitimate. She was Trevor's partner in the scheme, not his victim. Connor spent 2 weeks documenting this relationship and the financial crimes involved. He photographed Jennifer accessing Trevor's company's banking systems. He recorded conversations where she discussed moving foundation money through fake accounts. He even obtained copies of fraudulent invoices that she had created. When Connor was satisfied that he had enough evidence to destroy both Trevor and Jennifer, he made his move. The plan required precise timing. Connor waited until Trevor was at his Tuesday meeting with Jennifer, then called the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "I have evidence of foundation fraud involving the Morrison Foundation and Walsh Development Group," he told the agent who answered. "Multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records, recorded conversations, photographs, and documentation going back 5 years. I'm talking about $2 million in diverted charitable funds." The FBI agent took Connor's information and scheduled a meeting for the following day. Connor delivered everything he had gathered: financial records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline showing how the scheme operated. "This is comprehensive," the agent said, reviewing the files. "How did you obtain this information?" "I'm a licensed private investigator," Connor lied smoothly. "I was hired by a client who suspected irregularities in foundation grant allocations." "Who's your client?" "Attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you that this person has a legitimate interest in seeing foundation money used properly." The FBI launched their investigation immediately. Within 48 hours, they had obtained warrants for Trevor's business and personal financial records. They also began surveillance of both Trevor and Jennifer. Connor watched from across the street as federal agents executed search warrants at Walsh Development Group's offices. Trevor arrived at work that morning to find his building surrounded by law enforcement vehicles. The charges, when they came down, were devastating. Trevor and Jennifer were both arrested on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. Richard Walsh was arrested separately for his role in the scheme, but Connor's personal satisfaction came from collateral damage. The investigation revealed not just the foundation fraud, but Trevor's gambling debts, tax evasion, and a dozen other financial crimes. The man's entire life was exposed as a web of corruption and entitlement. Lisa filed for divorce within a week of Trevor's arrest. She claimed she had no knowledge of his criminal activities and was fighting to protect her assets from federal seizure. The country club expelled Trevor from membership. His construction projects were frozen by court order. Most importantly, the Morrison Foundation was forced to undergo a complete restructuring. The scandal had exposed widespread corruption in their grant allocation process. New leadership was brought in, and they established strict oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. Emma read about Trevor's arrest in the newspaper. Dad, this is incredible. They were stealing money from scholarships. Some people think they're entitled to take whatever they want, Connor said. Sometimes they need to be reminded that there are consequences. Do you think this is connected to what happened with my scholarship? Connor looked at his daughter, who was now excitedly planning her freshman year at Stanford. I think justice found a way, sweetheart. It usually does. But Connor's justice wasn't finished yet. Trevor Walsh was facing federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. His business was destroyed, his marriage was over, and his reputation was ruined. However, Connor wanted one final meeting. There was something Trevor needed to understand about the kind of man he had chosen to cross. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Federal prison was different from what Trevor Walsh had imagined. The minimum security facility where he was being held pending trial was clean and organized, but it was still prison. Trevor's bail had been denied after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with significant offshore assets. Connor waited in the visitor's room, wearing a simple gray suit and carrying nothing but his identification. He'd requested the meeting through official channels, claiming to be a potential character witness for Trevor's sentencing hearing. When Trevor entered the room, Connor was struck by how much the man had changed. Prison had stripped away his artificial confidence, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely frightened for the first time in his life. "What are you doing here?" Trevor asked, sitting across from Connor at the metal table. "I wanted to see how you were adjusting to your new circumstances." Trevor's hands shook slightly as he clasped them together. "You did this. All of it. The scholarship was just the beginning. The scholarship was the end, Trevor. Everything else was you paying for 30 years of believing you could take whatever you wanted without consequences. I'm looking at 20 years in federal prison. My life is over." Connor leaned back in his chair. "Your life isn't over. It's just different now. You'll serve maybe 12 years with good behavior. You'll get out when you're 58, still young enough to start over." "Start over with what?" "My company's gone. My assets are frozen. My wife divorced me and took our son. I'll have nothing. You'll have what everyone else has, the opportunity to earn what you get through work and merit. No more daddy's money. No more family connections. No more stealing from children. Just you and whatever you can build with your own hands." Trevor's composure cracked. "Emma got her scholarship back. Why wasn't that enough for you?" Connor's expression didn't change. "Because you needed to understand what kind of man you decided to cross. You thought I was just another divorced dad who would roll over when someone more powerful pushed him around. You thought wrong. You destroyed my entire life over a scholarship dispute. I didn't destroy your life, Trevor. I exposed it. Everything that's happening to you now is the result of choices you made long before you met my daughter. The foundation fraud, the gambling, the affairs, the tax evasion, I didn't create any of that. I just made sure the right people found out about it." Trevor was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of man are you?" "I'm a father," Connor said simply. "And I'm the kind of man who keeps his promises. I promised Emma she was going to Stanford, and she is. I promised you that there would be consequences for trying to steal from her, and there were. The FBI said someone had been investigating our foundation grants for months. That was you. That was me being thorough. I don't do anything halfway, Trevor." Trevor looked around the visitor's room, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "You planned all of this from the beginning. The scholarship was never really about the scholarship. The scholarship was about my daughter's future. Everything else was about teaching you a lesson. Some people can't be bullied, Trevor. Some people fight back. And some people, when they fight back, don't stop until their enemy understands exactly what they've cost themselves." Connor stood up. "I want you to think about something while you're in here. Emma is going to Stanford on a scholarship she earned through 3 years of perfect grades and sacrifice. She's going to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and she's going to contribute something meaningful to the world." He paused at the door. "Your nephew Kyle dropped out of Stanford after 1 semester to travel Europe, just like he said he would. The Morrison Foundation has blacklisted your entire family from future awards. Your son will have to earn his own way through life, without daddy's connections to smooth the path." "You're a monster," Trevor whispered. Connor turned back. "No, Trevor. I'm just a father who loves his daughter more than you loved yours. The difference is I was willing to do whatever it took to protect her future. You were willing to steal it for your own family's benefit. Connor left the prison and drove home to his modest apartment. Emma was at the kitchen table again, but this time she was working on Stanford orientation materials instead of scholarship applications. "How was work, Dad?" she asked without looking up. "Good. Very good. Everything worked out exactly the way it should have." Emma smiled and went back to her paperwork. She was planning her class schedule, researching professors, and preparing for the life she had earned through her own determination and sacrifice. Connor watched her for a moment, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Trevor Walsh would serve his time and hopefully learn something about the difference between earning success and stealing it. But more importantly, Emma would get the future she deserved. And Connor had kept his promise. Some fights were worth whatever they cost. Some principles were worth defending regardless of the consequences. And some people, when they threatened what you loved most, needed to be reminded that there were still people in the world who couldn't be bullied. Trevor Walsh had learned that lesson. Connor hoped it would serve him well during the long years ahead. Chapter 7. The Final Truth. 3 months after Trevor's sentencing to 15 years in federal prison, Connor received an unexpected visitor. Lisa stood at his apartment door, looking older and more defeated than he'd seen her even during their divorce. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Connor let her in, curious about what could have brought his ex-wife to his doorstep. She'd been publicly claiming complete ignorance of Trevor's crimes, painting herself as another victim of his deception. "I know it was you," Lisa said once they were seated in Connor's small living room. "The whole thing. Trevor's arrest, the Foundation investigation, all of it." Connor didn't respond immediately. "What makes you think that?" "Because I know you. When someone hurts Emma, you don't just get angry, you get even. And you don't stop until you've won completely." Lisa looked around the modest apartment, taking in the simple furniture and basic amenities. "I also know you're capable of planning something like this. The military taught you to think strategically, to gather intelligence, to execute complex operations. Trevor was a criminal. Lisa, the FBI found evidence of fraud going back years. Evidence that someone led them to. Evidence that someone had been carefully collecting and organizing." Lisa met his eyes. "How long did you plan this?" Connor considered his answer. "There was no point in lying now. From the moment Trevor told me that you deserved Emma's scholarship more than she did. Before the arrest, before the investigation, I started gathering information the day after Trevor stole Emma's scholarship. The foundation fraud was real, Lisa. I just made sure the right people knew about it." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "Trevor says you destroyed his life." "Trevor destroyed his own life. I just exposed what he'd been hiding. But you did it deliberately. You planned to ruin him from the beginning." Connor nodded. "Yes, I did." Lisa looked at him with something between fear and fascination. "You're not the same man I married." "No, I'm not. The man you married would have accepted what Trevor did and try to work within the system. Would have believed that good people eventually get rewarded and bad people eventually get punished. And now I know better. Sometimes good people get crushed by people with more money and power. Sometimes bad people win because nobody's willing to fight them properly. Sometimes justice needs help." Lisa stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. "Do you know what the worst part is? Part of me admires what you did. Trevor was a bully and a thief. He deserved what happened to him. But you scared me, Connor. The man who could plan and execute something like this. That's not someone I want to be around." Connor understood. The person he'd become in order to protect Emma wasn't someone most people would be comfortable knowing. He'd crossed lines that normal people didn't cross, used skills that normal people didn't have. "Emma doesn't know, does she?" Lisa asked. "Emma knows that justice was done. She doesn't need to know how. And me? What happens to me now?" Connor looked at his ex-wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "You go on with your life. You find someone else to provide the lifestyle you want. You stay away from Emma and me unless it's absolutely necessary. That's it. After everything that's happened. What did you expect, Lisa? You chose Trevor over our daughter. You stood by while he stole her scholarship. You only care about what happened because you got caught up in the consequences." Lisa's face flushed with anger. "I didn't know about the foundation fraud. I thought Trevor was just using his connections to help his nephew. And that was fine with you? Taking a scholarship away from a girl who earned it and giving it to a boy who didn't. I thought it would be better for Emma in the long run. Trevor's family had money and influence. They could have helped her later. Connor stood up. This conversation is over. Lisa, you made your choice when you decided that Trevor's family deserved Emma's scholarship more than Emma did. You live with the consequences. What if I had fought him? What if I had told him no? Then Emma would have kept her scholarship. Trevor would probably still be stealing from the foundation, and you'd still be married to a criminal who just hadn't been caught yet. Lisa moved toward the door. I was scared, Connor. Trevor had money and lawyers and connections. I didn't think I could fight him. I was scared too, Lisa. Scared that my daughter's future was being stolen by people who thought they were entitled to take it. The difference is I fought anyway. After Lisa left, Connor sat in his quiet apartment and thought about the choices that had led to this moment. He'd become someone who was capable of destroying another person's life with careful planning and ruthless execution. That wasn't who he'd been when he married Lisa, or even when he'd left the military. But it was who he'd needed to become to protect Emma. Emma came home from her part-time job at the library that evening, excited about orientation week at Stanford. She was leaving for California in 2 weeks, and Connor was helping her plan what to pack. Dad, I got an email from my academic advisor. She said the Morrison Foundation wants to feature me in their newsletter as an example of scholarship recipients who overcome adversity. Connor smiled. That's wonderful, sweetheart. She asked if I wanted to write about what the scholarship means to me, about how it represents opportunity and merit triumphing over obstacles. What did you tell her? That I'd love to write something, that the scholarship represents everything I believe about working hard and earning what you get. Emma paused, looking at her father carefully. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Trevor Walsh was really guilty of all those crimes? It seems like such a coincidence that he got arrested right after the scholarship got restored. Connor met his daughter's eyes. I think Trevor Walsh was the kind of man who believed he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. And I think he was wrong. Emma nodded slowly. Good. Because for a while there, I was starting to think that maybe the world really was rigged for people like him. That maybe hard work didn't really matter. Hard work always matters, Emma. Sometimes it just needs help. Emma hugged her father tightly. I love you, Dad. Thank you for believing in me. I love you too, sweetheart. Always. As Emma went to her room to work on her scholarship essay, Connor reflected on what he'd learned about himself over the past year. He discovered that he was capable of planning and executing operations that would destroy another person's life. He learned that he could cross moral and legal lines when protecting someone he loved. But most importantly, he learned that some fights were worth whatever they cost. Emma was going to Stanford because she'd earned it, not because someone had given it to her out of pity or obligation. She would succeed in life based on her own merit and determination. Trevor Walsh would spend the next 12 to 15 years in federal prison, learning what it meant to have your choices limited by other people's decisions. Maybe he would emerge as a better person. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, Connor had kept his promise. Emma was going to Stanford, and Trevor Walsh understood exactly what kind of man he'd chosen to cross. Justice, Connor had learned, wasn't always pretty, but sometimes it was necessary. Chapter 8, Stanford and New Beginnings. Stanford University's campus in August was everything Emma had dreamed of during those long nights studying for perfect grades. Red-tiled roofs, palm trees, and the kind of academic atmosphere that seemed to promise unlimited possibilities. Connor helped her move into her dorm room, watching his daughter transform from the exhausted teenager who'd nearly lost everything to a confident young woman ready to take on the world. Dad, this is incredible, Emma said, looking out her dorm window at the sprawling campus. I can't believe I'm actually here. Connor felt a deep satisfaction watching Emma settle into her new life. The girl who'd worked night shifts at the library to pay for college application fees was now surrounded by the resources and opportunities that came with attending one of the world's premier universities. During orientation week, Connor met other parents and heard their stories. Many were wealthy professionals who'd saved for years to afford Stanford's tuition. Others were middle-class families making significant sacrifices. A few, like Connor, were there because their children had earned full scholarships. "Your daughter must be exceptional," said Dr. Patricia Kim, another parent whose son had received a partial scholarship. "The Morrison Foundation is incredibly selective." "She worked for it," Connor replied simply. "Still, she's lucky the scholarship went to the right person." "I heard there was some controversy earlier this year about a student who wasn't qualified receiving the award." Connor nodded. "I heard that too. Apparently, the foundation discovered the student had questionable qualifications and was using family connections instead of merit. Well, I'm glad they caught it. Scholarships should go to students who've earned them." That evening, Connor had dinner with Emma at a restaurant near campus. She was glowing with excitement about her classes, her professors, and her fellow students. "Dad, I met my faculty advisor today. Professor Martinez teaches constitutional law, and she said I have the academic foundation to consider law school after my undergraduate degree." "Is that what you want to do?" "I think so. I want to help people who can't help themselves. Maybe work in civil rights or family law." Connor smiled, thinking about how perfectly that career choice fit his daughter's character. Emma had always been driven by a desire to see fairness and justice prevail. "There's something else," Emma said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Professor Martinez asked about my background, about what motivated me to work so hard in high school." "What did you tell her?" "I told her about the divorce, about how we had to start over with nothing, about working at the library and studying constantly because I knew education was my only path to a better life." Emma paused, playing with her food. "But I didn't tell her about what happened with the scholarship, about Trevor stealing it and then getting arrested. I didn't know how to explain all that." "You don't need to explain it, sweetheart. That's not your story to tell. Your story is that you worked hard, earned a scholarship, and now you're at Stanford pursuing your dreams." "But it feels like I'm leaving out something important. Like there's this whole part of what happened that I don't understand." Connor reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Emma, there are some things in life that adults handle so that young people can focus on their futures. What happened with Trevor Walsh was one of those things. Did you have something to do with his arrest?" Connor looked at his daughter, seeing the intelligence and perceptiveness that had always made her special. She was old enough to understand complex moral questions, but she was also about to start a new life that shouldn't be shadowed by the darker aspects of justice. "I made sure the right people knew the truth about Trevor Walsh," Connor said carefully. "I didn't create his crimes, but I did make sure they were discovered." Emma nodded slowly. "Because he tried to steal my scholarship. Because he tried to steal your future. And because I promised you that you were going to Stanford." "Was it legal? What you did?" "Mostly. And when it wasn't, it was necessary." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Are you proud of what you did?" "I'm proud that you're here, earning your degree based on merit and hard work. I'm proud that Trevor Walsh learned there are consequences for bullying people. And I'm proud that the Morrison Foundation cleaned up their grant process so this can't happen to other students. Were you proud of the methods you used?" Connor considered the question carefully. "I'm proud that I was willing to do whatever it took to protect your future. Whether that makes me a good person or a bad person, I guess that's for other people to judge." Emma squeezed her father's hand. "It makes you my dad, and that's all I need to know." They finished dinner and walked around the Stanford campus as the sun set. Emma pointed out the library where she planned to spend most of her time, the dormitory where she'd made her first college friends, and the building where she'd have her first constitutional law class. "Dad, I have one more question." "What's that?" "Trevor's in prison for 15 years. That seems like a long time for scholarship fraud." "Trevor wasn't just guilty of scholarship fraud, Emma. The FBI found evidence that he'd been stealing from the Morrison Foundation for years. Money that should have gone to students like you went to his family's business projects instead." "How much money?" "Nearly $2 million over 5 years. Money that could have funded dozens of scholarships for deserving students." Emma stopped walking. "He stole money from dozens of students. He stole opportunities, dreams, futures. The scholarship he took from you was just the latest in a long series of thefts. So when you made sure he got caught, I was protecting more than just your scholarship, Emma. I was protecting every future student who deserved a fair chance at those opportunities." Emma looked up at the Stanford clock tower, visible in the distance. Then I'm glad you did what you did, even if it was scary and complicated. Justice usually is, sweetheart. The next morning, Connor prepared to return home. Emma was settled in her dorm, registered for classes, and ready to begin her college career. As he packed his suitcase, Connor reflected on how much his life had changed over the past year. He discovered capabilities he didn't know he possessed. He'd crossed moral and legal lines that he'd never imagined crossing. He'd become someone who was capable of destroying another person's life through careful planning and execution. But he'd also kept his promise to his daughter. Emma was at Stanford, pursuing her dreams, surrounded by opportunities she'd earned through her own merit and determination. "Dad," Emma said, appearing in his hotel room doorway. "Before you leave, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I know that what you did for me, it changed you, made you into someone harder and more dangerous than you were before." Connor started to protest, but Emma held up her hand. "And I want you to know that I understand why you did it. And I love you for being willing to become that person to protect my future." Emma hugged her father tightly. "But I also want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that you'll try to find your way back to being the person you were before all this started. The person who taught me that good people eventually get rewarded and bad people eventually get punished." Connor held his daughter close, feeling the weight of what she was asking. "I'll try, Emma. I promise I'll try." As Connor drove away from Stanford, he thought about Emma's request. She was asking him to find his way back to being someone who believed in justice without having to create it personally. Someone who trusted systems and institutions to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. It would be difficult. The past year had taught him too much about how the world really worked, about how people with money and connections could take whatever they wanted until someone stopped them. But for Emma, he would try. Because the girl who was now studying at Stanford on a scholarship she'd earned deserved to live in a world where her father wasn't always ready for war. Even if Connor could never completely return to the person he'd been before Trevor Walsh, he could try to become someone worthy of the daughter he'd fought so hard to protect. Chapter 9. The Price of Protection. 5 years later, Connor stood in the audience at Stanford Law School's graduation ceremony, watching Emma walk across the stage to receive her JD degree. She'd graduated summa cum laude, earned a position at a prestigious civil rights law firm, and was already planning to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The girl who'd almost lost her scholarship to Trevor Walsh's entitlement had become exactly what Connor had hoped, a woman who would make the world more just through her own efforts and abilities. "Congratulations, counselor," Connor said when Emma found him after the ceremony. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." They had dinner that evening at the same restaurant where they'd talked during Emma's freshman orientation. Emma was glowing with pride and excitement about her future, but Connor could see deeper questions in her eyes. "Dad, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for a long time?" "Of course. Do you ever regret what you did to Trevor Walsh?" Connor considered the question carefully. In the 5 years since Trevor's arrest, Connor had occasionally wondered the same thing. Trevor was still in federal prison, serving what would ultimately be a 12-year sentence. His life had been completely destroyed, his business gone, his marriage ended, his reputation ruined. "I regret that it was necessary," Connor said finally. "I regret that the world is a place where someone like Trevor Walsh could steal opportunities from people like you without consequences. But do you regret stopping him?" "No, I don't regret protecting your future." Emma nodded. "I've been thinking about this a lot as I studied law, about justice and revenge and the difference between them. What conclusion did you reach?" "That sometimes they're the same thing. And sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect what matters most." Emma reached across the table and took her father's hand. "I also concluded that I was lucky to have a father who was willing to become someone dangerous to protect me." Connor felt a complex mix of pride and sadness. He was proud that Emma understood the choices he'd made, but sad that she'd had to learn such harsh lessons about how the world worked. "There's something else I need to tell you," Emma continued. "I got a letter last month from Trevor Walsh." Connor's expression hardened. "What did he want?" "To apologize. To me, not to you. He said he'd spent 5 years in prison thinking about what he'd done and he wanted me to know that he understood he tried to steal something I'd earned. What did you do with the letter? I wrote back. I told him that his apology was appreciated, but not necessary. That I hoped he'd learn something about earning success instead of taking it. Emma paused. I also told him that my father had taught me that people who try to steal from children should expect consequences. Connor smiled at that. What did he say to that? He wrote back one more time. He said he understood why you did what you did, and that if he had a daughter, he hoped you would have been brave enough to fight for her the way you fought for me. Do you believe him? I think prison changed him. Whether it made him a better person or just a more careful person, I don't know. But I think he understands now that actions have consequences. They finished dinner and walked through Stanford's campus one last time before Emma's new life began. She would start work at her law firm the following month, focusing on cases involving educational access and civil rights. Dad, I have one more question. What's that? Are you happy with how everything turned out? Connor looked at his daughter. Brilliant, accomplished, ready to make the world better through her own efforts. Emma, I'm prouder of you than I've ever been of anything in my life. You earned everything you've achieved, and you're going to help people who need help. But are you happy? Connor considered the question. The past 5 years have been complicated. He'd built a successful security consulting business, but he'd never remarried or formed serious relationships. The person he'd become to protect Emma wasn't someone most people were comfortable being around. He'd stayed in touch with some of his military friends, but found that civilian life felt different now. He understood too much about how power really worked, about how people with wealth and connections could take whatever they wanted until someone stopped them. I'm satisfied, Connor said finally. I kept my promise to you, and justice was done. That's enough. Emma stopped walking and turned to face her father. Dad, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that you'll try to find some happiness for yourself. You protected my future, but you deserve a future too. Connor looked at his daughter, seeing the concern in her eyes. She understood that protecting her had cost him something essential. Some fundamental belief in the goodness of people and systems. I'll try, Emma. Promise me you'll really try. Maybe start dating again. Maybe trust someone enough to let them get close to you. I promise I'll try. They hugged goodbye the next morning. Emma was driving to Los Angeles to start her new job, and Connor was flying back to his apartment and his security consulting business. On the plane, Connor thought about Emma's questions about happiness and the future. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure who he was anymore outside of being Emma's father and protector. The person he'd been before Trevor Walsh felt like someone from a very long time ago. But Emma was right that he deserved some kind of future beyond just the satisfaction of having protected hers. Maybe it was time to try building something new, something that wasn't defined by the need to fight for what was right. When Connor got home, he found a package waiting at his door. Inside was a graduation photo of Emma in her cap and gown, along with a note. Dad, thank you for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, and that good people don't always win unless someone helps them. Thank you for being willing to become someone dangerous to protect what was right. And thank you for showing me that love sometimes means being willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, Emma. Connor put the photo on his kitchen table and looked around his modest apartment. For 5 years, this had been enough. A base of operations for the man who destroyed Trevor Walsh and protected his daughter's future. Maybe it was time to see if it could become something more. Maybe it was time to see if the person who'd been willing to cross any line to protect Emma could learn to build something positive for himself. Connor picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There were several women he'd met through his business who'd expressed interest in getting to know him better. He'd always deflected these advances, unwilling to let anyone get close enough to see what he'd become. But Emma was right. He deserved some kind of happiness beyond just the satisfaction of justice done. Connor selected a contact and typed a text. Hi, Sarah. This is Connor Reed. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime this week. He sent the message before he could change his mind. Whatever happened next, at least he was trying to honor his promise to Emma. Outside his window, the sun was setting over a world that was slightly more just because Connor Reed had been willing to do whatever it took to protect his daughter's future. Trevor Walsh was in federal prison. The Morrison Foundation had cleaned up